Hello folks. I decided I wanted to make a video about some of the confusion regarding worker cooperatives and the nature of both socialism and communism, because there's a lot of confusion out there. Now, I want to first talk about worker cooperatives. A worker cooperative is an enterprise engaged in production or sometimes in service, sometimes it's a coffee shop, but usually it's a factory, in which those who work in it are themselves the owners. And this is a good thing, right? When you have a factory and it's producing products and the workers themselves don't just get a wage in exchange for their labor, but they actually get a percentage of what's being produced, this is a good thing. When you have a coffee shop and those who work there get a percentage of the profits made from their labor, that's a good thing. And it's not simply a good thing in that it's fair, right? That people are not being exploited. But in addition to that, it's a good thing because those workers have more of an incentive to work. If they're simply getting a wage, they don't really care how well the business does. But they're going to be more productive and work harder if they get a payout, if they get a percentage of the profits. So worker co-ops are a very good thing, and I'm not opposed to worker co-ops. However, worker cooperatives are not socialism. That's an important point. Socialism is when the major centers of economic power, banks, factories, oil wells, means of communication, means of transportation, all the major centers of economic power are operated on the basis of public good and not profits, right? In capitalism, we don't have food so people can eat it. We have food so agribusiness and big box store owners can make profits. In capitalism, we don't have housing because people need a place to live. We have housing so that landlords and bankers and construction companies and others can make profits. In capitalism, production is carried out on the basis of profits. And even if you have worker cooperatives, that's still production being carried out on the basis of profits, even though those profits are shared among those who work in the enterprise that produces them. And you still don't address some of the fundamental problems of production for profit. For example, worker co-ops compete with each other. One worker co-op could be making the same product as another and put the other out of business. And then all the people who are at the other place would then lose their jobs and have unemployment, right? Worker cooperatives, say they produce weapons, for example, right? Say there's a worker co-op whose job it is to make bombs or tanks or drones. It would be in their interest for the United States to engage in more wars, right? There's nothing that would stop the military-industrial complex. In fact, all the worker owners of a worker cooperative would benefit from the United States being involved in militarism around the world, right? You could see a worker cooperative polluting the environment. Why? Well, they would get a bigger share. They're still operating according to profits. Furthermore, the biggest fundamental problem of capitalism is the issue of workers' competition with machines, that the more efficient you make production, right, you eliminate jobs, and that abundance and efficient production creates poverty. And this is what Marx lays out in the book Capital, is this understanding that as technology increases, fewer and fewer workers are needed. And that problem is not addressed by the issue of production being organized in worker cooperatives. In fact, you can see a worker cooperative very much wanting to eliminate the number of employees with machines, right? The fewer employees that are hired, the bigger percentage that each worker gets. So you can see worker cooperatives trying to have as few employees as possible so that the 2 or 3 or 10 or 20 people there get a bigger percentage, right? If they all get a percentage of the profit, you want as few workers involved in that as possible, right? And so worker cooperatives are a good thing, and I think that worker cooperatives could certainly and most certainly have played a role in socialist societies that have existed, but they do not point to the essence of socialism, right? Socialism is when production is not carried out according to profits. It's eliminating the anarchy of production or the chaos of the market and is having a planned economy. And that points toward another point that people make. You'll get a lot of people who will say, well, the Soviet Union wasn't socialist, China today isn't socialist, Cuba isn't socialist, because they say socialism is each according to their own ability, each according to their needs. Socialism is a society in which there's no hierarchy whatsoever. Socialism is a society where there's no wages, there's no sales. That's not correct. They're conflating socialism and communism. Socialism is a society in which the means of production are controlled by society. As Marx put it in the Communist Manifesto, he talked about, the proletariat resting by degree all the major centers of economic power or the means of production into state control, right? Frederick Engels talked about state control of production upon a predetermined plan. Socialism is when the anarchy of production, the chaos of the market, is eliminated, and there's a planned economy. And the idea is that socialism will eventually give way, after maybe thousands of years, to the higher stage of communism. And communism is a society in which there is so much material abundance, there is so much stuff being produced, that the need for coercion and state control goes away. The idea is that it won't really be necessary, right? So much technology will have been unleashed to produce so much stuff that ultimately the need for coercion will go away. Communism is an ideal. It's an ideal society in which so little is required of people that they can just do what they feel like doing, from each according to their own ability, from each according to their need, is the vision. And communism itself is based on an ideal of extremely high abundance, where people really don't need to do that much. They just kind of do what they feel like doing. That's the vision of communism. And in the 20th century, many countries around the world adopted socialism. All of those countries were historically impoverished countries. They were countries in, South Latin America. They were countries in Asia, countries, there was, Russia and the surrounding countries. Many countries adopted socialism, but they adopted socialism because they were being kept poor by the capitalist economic system. The way capitalism had developed, Britain, the United States, Western countries had a relationship with the world in which they kept countries in chronic poverty, right? They used them as spheres of influence or captive markets. And these countries were basically forced to adopt socialism in order to break out of that. In order to raise themselves up out of poverty, the countries of the developing world were forced basically to adopt socialism. We saw that with China. China broke out of capitalism, took control of its own means of production, started operating them on the basis of a predetermined plan, and ultimately they've now become the second largest economy in the world. Russia became a superpower with socialism. Cuba has had great achievements. Many countries, by utilizing socialism, have been able to raise up their standard of living, and it basically was a mechanism. Socialism was a mechanism in the 20th century for impoverished countries to seize control of their economies and begin rationally organizing production in order to not be kept poor, but to pull themselves up by their bootstraps and get out of poverty. That's what socialism was in the 20th century and continues to be in the 21st century, with countries like Venezuela, for example. Communism is a stage that would come after thousands of years. Communism is after the entire world is socialist, after socialist production has encompassed all of humanity, as countries are developing such a high state of material abundance, far beyond what we have in the West now. When countries have reached such an extreme state of material abundance and have so much stuff, then you can start to see the beginning of communism. But most of the countries around the world have simply adopted socialism based on extreme conditions of poverty and scarcity to try and organize their economy to get out of those conditions. And that's what people don't understand. So the reason that socialist countries have things like wages or income differentials or billionaires or people buying products in stores, it's because they're socialist. They're not communist. They have a planned economy. The economy is rationally organized in the hopes of raising up the country and raising up society out of poverty, but it still maintains aspects of the capitalist market, and that's the difference. And I think people need to understand this. Socialism is not communism. Worker co-ops are not socialism or communism, and it's important that we don't conflate these things. So I just wanted to make that point.